Hello and welcome to this video exploring why is having a baby like running a marathon, reproduction, achievement, and the embodied self. So we'll start with an introduction. My name is Professor Fiona Woollard. I've been teaching and researching philosophy here at the University of Southampton for about 10 years now. My key research interests are in normative ethics and the philosophy of pregnancy, birth, and early motherhood. And this talk is part of my research on the philosophy of pregnancy, birth, and early motherhood. So, why is having a baby like running a marathon? They might seem like pretty different activities, but when you think about it, they've actually got quite a lot in common. When we're pregnant, we use our bodies to shelter and nourish the growing human from microscopic blastocyst to full-term fetus. Recent research has shown that doing this pushes the boundaries of human endurance, with peaks of energy use that are only otherwise seen in extreme athletes. And when it comes to giving birth, the uterus exerts 100 to 400 newtons of downwards force with each contraction. That's equivalent to the force exerted by many men's Olympic weightlifting record holders, and indeed it outdoes some of them. After birth, we might produce over 1,000 grams of milk every day. And this isn't just any old milk. It's tailor-made to meet our baby's needs. It becomes higher in calories when the baby signals a growth spurt by feeding frequently throughout the day. And it also contains antibodies to protect the baby when either the mother or the baby gets sick, in this amazing, really super cool feedback mechanism where the body senses and analyzes the saliva of the infant to work out whether it needs antibodies. It's very, very cool. But having a baby is treated very differently from running a marathon. Pregnancy, birth, and breastfeeding seem to be treated very differently from other physical achievements like running marathons. They seem to be either celebrated in the wrong way, treated as yardsticks for motherhood with shame doled out to those who don't measure up, or ignored or diminished, dismissed as a simple matter of luck or uninteresting biology. One of my projects in the philosophy of pregnancy, birth, and early motherhood looks at what I call GERAs. These are gendered, embodied, reproductive achievements. And it's my term for things like pregnancy, birth, breastfeeding. These are gendered, embodied, reproductive achievements. They're gendered because even though it is true that men can give birth, can chest feed, and can be pregnant, our understanding of these things is still bound up with the thought that these are things that women do, and our understanding, our expectations of women are bound up with the thought that women do these things. They're embodied because they're things that we do with our bodies. They're reproductive because they're to do with producing children. And I think they really are genuine achievements. It involves doing something very difficult. So I want to think about why we have trouble. I'm going to pause while that train goes by. The joys of living by a railway line. I want to think about why we have trouble appropriately recognizing GERAs as achievements, and how this connects to our understanding of women as embodied selves, to our understanding of the relationship between women's selves and their bodies. I think we see two common ways of thinking about GERAs. The first option is a kind of idolization. This overstates the importance of certain privileged geras, which would include conception without intervention and a pregnancy which doesn't involve much medical intervention, a vaginal birth, and breastfeeding. This way of thinking sees these as essential badges of good motherhood, and also often sees motherhood as an essential part of womanhood. So those who collect all the badges are often extravagantly praised. But this has the flip side that women who don't collect these badges are seen as either deviant or broken, and often subject to shame for this. They're seen as either bad women or bad mothers, as they're deviant if they make choices. So if they choose to remain child-free, if they choose to feed their babies formula, or if they choose to have a C-section, for example, they're seen as deviant, as making bad choices, as morally bad. If, on the other hand, if they are unable to conceive, unable to remain pregnant, unable to give birth vaginally, or unable to breastfeed, then they're seen as broken, as flawed. It might be thought that it's not their fault, but they're still seen as not quite living up to being a good mother or a good woman. This way of thinking also, as I said, privileges some geras and ignores others. So it ignores what is involved in, for example, enduring a C-section, and in particular in caring for a baby while recovering from a C-section, which, as somebody who's experienced both a vaginal birth and a C-section, I can tell you, I think probably the C-section, caring for the baby while recovering from the C-section, was more physically demanding, I think. The other way that we see people thinking about geras is really by thinking about them as little as possible. This is a kind of invisibility. This way of thinking dismisses geras as mother and baby stuff, a bit gross, involving body bits, women who are seen as being in danger of boasting about their achievements are chastised and warned not to be smug. They might be told, it wasn't you, it was just your body, you were just lucky, stop talking about it, shut up. This all has the upshot that pregnant, birthing and lactating people are divided from their bodies, and they're told not to talk about or feel good about significant experiences. And another important aspect of our thinking about geras is that these two options are seen as the only options. So if you push back against the shame or the idea that women who don't collect all the badges are deviant, you will be seen as silencing women, as chastising them and trying to tell them that they shouldn't talk about it. If, on the other hand, you try and talk about your experiences or say that these should be recognised as achievements, you'll be seen as shaming people who haven't collected these badges. So they're presented as the only two options. So why is this? What's going on here? And what has all this got to do with the self? Well, I think one aspect of the problem that we have in thinking about geras is to do with how we do or don't recognise women as embodied selves. I think idealisation goes along with a way of thinking about women and their bodies which basically reduces women to their bodies or reproductive capacities. It sees women's destiny as biological reproduction and women's value as coming from their ability or their actual biological reproduction. On the other side, invisibility seems to be ignoring things that women do with their bodies, or their reproductive capacities, ignoring the purposeful agency that's often involved in exercising these capacities, and seeing a division between women and their bodies, so they can be told, you didn't do that, your body did that, that wasn't you, so that what your body does is seen as nothing to do with you. So what I think we need is an account of achievement that allows us to appropriately recognize women as embodied selves. And I think one promising account of achievement is that by Hirji. So Hirji argues that an achievement is a process culminating in a product that is competently caused and that tests the limit of an agent's perfectionist capacity. According to Hirji, a perfectionist capacity is one which is valuable. Train again. So according to Hirji, a perfectionist capacity is a capacity which is valuable for us to develop and exercise. And they note that some perfectionist capacities are only fully expressed if a particular product is produced or in an effortless activity. So this is a way of recognizing how sometimes there might be a disconnect between effort or difficulty and the achievement. So even if something you've put a lot of effort in, done something very difficult, there may be barriers which stop you from achieving something if you don't produce a particular product. And similarly, in some cases, it might be the very effortlessness of an activity that makes it an achievement. The example used here is a violinist who flawlessly and effortlessly plays a very complicated piece of music. The effortlessness might itself be part of the achievement, the expression, because that's how you fully express the musical ability. Okay, so I do think that we might need to make some amendments to this account. So one is, do we need to test the limits of a perfectionist capacity to have an achievement? Well, Hirji uses test the limits of a perfectionist capacity and fully express a perfectionist capacity and fully manifest a perfectionist capacity apparently interchangeably. Here I think it's important to note that achievements can have different relationships to the perfectionist capacities. They can operate close to the human limits of that capacity. They can operate close to the agent's limits of that capacity. And they can extend the agent's limits of that capacity. But I also wonder whether something can be a significant expression or manifestation of the capacity and an achievement for that reason without testing or extending limits. So that aspect of Hirji's account, I think, might need some amendment. I'm not sure that Hirji needs the competent causation condition because they already argue that full manifestation of creative capacities requires the production of a certain type of product in some cases. So I think you could just very easily add that the manifestation of creative capacities requires that the effect be produced in the right way. So, for example, if Judith's struggle to write inspires William to write a phenomenal poem, then that poem isn't a manifestation of Judith's creative abilities. Similarly, we might think that fully manifesting the will requires not just effort, not just doing something difficult, but effective effort where you produce the effect in the right way. So we might need to make some amendments, I think, to Hirji's account, but I think this amended Hirji account might help us to recognise Jeras as achievements in the right kind of way. So for the amended Hirji account to recognise geras as genuine achievements, we need to see them as significant manifestations of a perfectionist capacity, remembering that a perfectionist capacity is one which it's valuable for us to develop and exercise. And I do think that the capacities that we see in geras are valuable capacities, perfectionist capacities, which should be recognised as such. So I think breast milk production is a reproductive physical capacity which it's valuable to develop and to exercise. And I do think that you're exercising that capacity when you breastfeed. I also think that pregnancy involves testing the limits of physical endurance, and that is exercising another valuable capacity. Okay, so here I want to talk about a possible objection to my argument that these are achievements, because there has been criticism of the understanding things like birth in terms of achievements. So Quill Cochler, for example, writing as Rebecca Cochler, has explicitly criticised the view of birth as what they call a maternal achievement test. So Cochler argues that there's a real problem with our understanding of birth, that we see mothers who don't fulfill our expectations of a good birth as failures of mothers, and that this is wrongly held to reflect their overall mothering abilities. And their response to that is we've got to stop thinking of birth as a maternal achievement test. But I think the amended account of achievement that I've put forward not only shows that we should count birth and other geras as achievements, but also shows how we can do that without contributing to this phenomenon which Cochler points out, and which I agree is a bad phenomenon which we should be fighting against. So why is that? Well, according to my account, birth and other geras are achievements because there are significant manifestations of human capacities which are valuable to develop and express. And the capacities in question are typically either physical capacities or capacities which combine the mental and the physical, such as endurance of great pain. And the nice thing about the Hirji account is that it makes achievements always relative to a certain capacity. So you ask, what is the perfectionist capacity that this achievement is manifesting? And geras are achievements relative to those physical and mental capacities. But recognizing these as achievements would only imply that someone who doesn't tick these boxes is a bad mother or a bad woman, if we had a certain view of what makes you a good mother or a good woman. It would have this implication if we thought that the important capacities for motherhood or for being a woman were having these physical and mental capacities. But that's clearly a hugely impoverished picture of motherhood and of womanhood, or of women as people. This isn't what's most important in being a mother, and it's also not what's most important in being a woman or a person. So I think that if we this approach to geras can help us to recognise women appropriately as embodied selves. So if we recognise that the capacities manifested in geras are not the only capacity or not the key capacities for being a good woman or a good mother, what we're doing there is pushing back against a tendency to reduce women to their reproductive capacities or to their bodies, to fail to see women as genuinely selves rather than just bodies. But on the other hand, By recognising that Jeras do manifest physical capacities which it's valuable for us as humans to develop and exercise, what we're doing is pushing back against this division between women and their bodies, and this making invisible what women do with their bodies. So I think this is a way of appropriately recognizing women as embodied selves and getting that right, getting the relationship between women and their bodies right, is really key to being able to then recognize Jeras as achievements in an appropriate way. So to sum up, we do amazing things with our bodies in pregnancy, birth, and the postpartum period. But these are often either ignored or celebrated in a way that's not happy, that makes some people feel bad, and that focuses on some achievements over others. What I want to do is to think about why we have trouble appropriately recognizing Jeras as achievements and how this connects to our understanding of women as embodied selves. I think we can appropriately recognize Jeras as achievements by, first of all, adopting an analysis of achievements as significant manifestations of a perfectionist capacity, i.e. a capacity that it's valuable for us as humans to develop and exercise. And secondly, recognizing that reproductive capacities are perfectionist capacities. They are valuable for us as humans to develop and exercise, but also that they're not the key capacity for being a good woman or a good mother, and they're not the only capacities for being a good woman and a good mother. And all of this involves appropriately recognizing women as embodied selves. Thank you very much for your attention. I'm going to leave you now with some references. So these are the two papers that I've referenced in this talk. That's Hirji's Not Always Worth the Effort, Difficulty in the Value of Achievement, and Kulkler's Measuring Mothers. And those are both very good papers I would recommend you read. Thank you very much.